Chapter 4. Suspend the Disbelief. February 27, 2010. The two men now sat at the kitchen table, a large desk lamp pointed directly at the schematic. Once Thomas had taken a moment to look it over, he realized just how right Brett had been. This was very much the work of Thomas Redmond, but it was very much not his work as well. Over the past 3 years, he had pored over countless schematics that looked virtually identical to the one in front of him now. Despite their similarities to the naked eye, Thomas now saw that there were a few minor differences, and one very major one. "This almost solves the problem," Thomas said. "But it doesn't, does it? Not quite." Brett was right on a technical level, but Thomas couldn't get past the importance of the paper sitting in front of him. "Either way, this is leaps and bounds beyond where I'm at. Whose work is this? Did your father do this? Did mine? Our fathers? No, of course not. Neither one of them could have done this in their wildest dream. I already told you. You did this." "No, I didn't. Not all of it. I never got here." "Not yet," Brett said. "But you do. And that's why my dad had to leave." Washed in the disbelief of the document in front of him and where it had come from, Thomas had forgotten the other question he desperately wanted an answer to. "You said your father had to go to Petersburg. Where in Petersburg?" Brett shook his head and smiled. "You're not going to believe this." "Where in Petersburg?" he asked again. "To your old house." Thomas looked across the table at the quirky man he hadn't known 20 minutes ago. "You're right. I don't believe you. Look, I'm not the right person to tell you this, but I'll try. It's all secondhand information to me. You really need to speak to my father as soon as possible." Brett stood up, grabbed a glass beside the sink, and filled it with water. "Can I get you a drink?" "I'm fine." Brett sat back at the table. "Okay," he gave an exasperated sigh. "Okay, where to start? The house in Petersburg, where you grew up? How long did you live there?" "We lived there until I was 9. We moved to Monroe the year my dad died." "Okay, what years was that you lived in Petersburg?" "It would have been 86 to 95 or 96. It must have been 95 because we moved in the late summer. So, this is where it's going to get sketchy for me because I only know what my dad told me 3 days ago. But do you know exactly why your parents moved into that house specifically?" Thomas was confused at the question. "Why? I mean, no particular reason as far as I know. I know they looked at a few houses in the area. They wanted to be in the country, but he needed to be close enough to commute to work. I think they narrowed it to that house and a house on the river in Dundee." "But he didn't choose the river house," Brett said, as if it was profound. "Your dad loved the river, right?" Thomas was starting to become skeptical of the man in front of him. "Did you know my father?" he asked. No, not at all. I met him once, years ago. But my father told me the river house was important to all of this." "Can you think of a reason your parents wouldn't have chosen the river house?" Not really. I mean, you're asking the wrong guy. I've probably heard the details of this story 3 or 4 times in my life, with 5 years in between each telling. It could have been money. Could have just preferred the house in Petersburg. The school district, maybe." No, it's not that. My dad said that your dad not choosing the river house was significant. That something major made him choose the Petersburg house. Something he'd found. Or discovered." "Okay," Thomas said, confused. "I don't know what you want me to say. I don't remember any story about this from my parent." "No, he wouldn't have told anyone. Let me ask you this. Can you tell me about the lilac bush in your backyard?" A chill ran up Thomas's spine. He immediately thought of the man he'd seen in the bush, and of the other thing in the window. He'd kept that quiet for a long time. He didn't plan to break his silence now. "The lilac bush? Yeah, there was a lilac bush in the backyard. Are you telling me your dad told you to meet with me and asked me about the lilac bush in the backyard of my childhood home? This seems really odd." "Oh, it's worse than odd, Tom. Please humor me. What can you tell me about the lilac bush?" Thomas laughed a little and shook his head. "It was a lilac bush. It kind of jutted out of the back corner of the yard, away from the fence. It was the property line between our yard and our neighbors on both sides. It was maybe 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. When the leaves came in, we'd play in it like it was a fort. What on earth could this bush have to do with anything? Was there anything else? Anything unique about it? Thomas considered telling him the story of his vision. He did not. Not that I can think of. We buried our pets in it after they died. Hamsters, gerbils, a couple dogs. No, that's not it, Brett said, disappointed. There was a cable box in the corner of it, kind of sat on a weird platform at the base of the telephone pole. Brett's eyes widened. Yes, that. Wait, what was it for? What was the box for? Thomas grimaced at the question. He didn't really know the answer. I don't know. Again, everyone just called it a cable box. I assume it was for cable TV or phone lines or maybe the internet later. Okay, now this is very important. Was there another one of these boxes in some straight line direction from the one in the lilac bushes within, say, 200 feet? Thomas could not believe the specificity of the questions, but he thought about it for a minute. Yes, he said finally. There was another box in the front yard. It didn't look the same, but it was there. It's not there anymore. It was gone before we moved. And it was how far from the box in the bush? I don't know, man. 100 feet? 150? It's not a very big yard. Brett stared at him in silence for an uncomfortable amount of time. Look, Thomas began, can you please just explain this to me? I'm not sure I'm comfortable answering questions like these with a stranger. I'm very confused at the relevant. I am too, Tom, Brett said, his eyes seemingly looking into nothingness. And no, I can't explain it, not entirely. But I can tell you this, the box you remember from the bush in your backyard was not a cable box. And the box you remember from the front yard that's no longer there was not a cable box. And those two boxes always have been and still are connected by a 12 by 12 tunnel underground. And you need to go through that tunnel as soon as you finish this. Brett tapped his finger hard 3 times on the diagram on the table in front of them. Thomas looked at him for the first time, seeing just how utterly crazy the man before him appeared. What the hell are you talking about, Brett? He said slowly. Your dad knew. He bought that house because he knew. He gave up the river house because he knew. He bought that house because of those 2 boxes. And my dad left 3 days ago to go to your old house in Petersburg so that things would be ready when you brought him this in its completed form. That's all I know, Tom. I'm sorry I don't know more. He slid the schematic closer to Thomas. You're saying I need to take this to Petersburg to the lilac bush in the backyard when it's finished? Yes, my dad will be in touch once he knows more. Thomas sat, mouth open, in disbelief. He didn't even know where to begin. Brett, he began, I'm trying to be kind here, and I understand this is all coming from your dad or whatever, but I need you to tell me, as simply as you can, why I need to do this. Brett shook his head. I don't know the answer, Tom. It all depends on that device. This, Thomas said, pointing at the schematic excitedly, still isn't done. It won't work. Even in this new form you can't possibly have, it still won't work. At this point, Thomas paused. He realized he'd been so angry that he'd forgotten to ask about the most absurd claim Brett had made. Which, by the way, Thomas continued, and I don't know how I haven't mentioned this yet, is a document which you claimed I gave to your father, who I have never met, who then gave it to you. No, would give to my father, not gave. And how do I do that, Brett? You got it working, and you went through the tunnel,